You need an ID to get a library card, vaccine, and buy a gun. And now vote in Georgia. Democrats call this stifling the right to vote. We explore the details behind the new Georgia election law bill.
Elections are secure, accessible, and fair.
Marilyn Mosby joins other progressive prosecutors in cities across the country to announce she will no longer prosecute drug possession, prostitution, and other low-level offenses. We discuss the details and outcomes.
CRI. For offenses we are no longer prosecuting in lieu of criminalization.
Oh baby, boss baby, and now woke baby? We discuss the movement to introduce social justice to toddlers and how you can have your child's very first words be, "No justice, no peace."
Goals and the curriculum goals that your kid can learn from playing these games.
And lastly, the ladies discuss internet relationship guru Derrick Jaxn and the fallout behind his confession about serial cheating on his wife.
A lot of people think of him as a relationship expert and guru and all of that. Well, he and his wife are making this video because apparently at some point in their marriage, or maybe even beforehand in the relationship, he didn't take his own advice. And he's...
Get your popcorn and get ready for Pop and Politics. Welcome to Pop and Politics, a show that highlights trending political news and pop culture. Each week, the ladies get together like girlfriends do to chat about the biggest local and national news stories. They all have varying backgrounds and personalities. One thing they share in common is they all lean on the conservative end of the political spectrum. Meet the ladies. KJ. T. Xandria. Shelly E. Hanalyn. Smart, edgy, and conservative. This is Pop and Politics. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to Pop and Politics. We are back with another action-packed show for you. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. We appreciate that, and it helps to get our video viewership up. If you're watching on Facebook, please share this video, comment, and like the video. We will be responding to comments throughout the show, so join the conversation. All right, tonight we are sponsored by Boy Kai Construction. Special sponsorship. The company is Value Satisfaction Boy Kai, 443-825-7984. Your one-stop shop for all your home improvement needs. Basement, remodeling, plumbing, framing, minor electrical. His guarantee is Value Satisfaction Boy Kai. Again, call Boy Kai Construction at 443-825-7984. 984 and mention Pop and Politics for a discount on your repair job. So, okay. All right. So we'll get started. We're starting off this evening with the Georgia election law bill. So just to give a little background before I got you guys, give your opinions on it. On Thursday, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp signed a complex and controversial omnibus bill that makes sweeping changes to practically every aspect of the state's voting and election system. The nearly 100-page long bill known as SB 202, or the Election Integrity Act of 2021, is the first major election-related bill signed into law in a swing state since the 2020 election. So, of course, civil rights groups and Democratic elected officials, including President Joe Biden, have forcefully denounced the law as suppressing voters, particularly the state's black voters, and have called on major corporations who do business in the state to speak out. So, what do you guys think? Have you been following it? Following anything with it?
I saw Coca-Cola and Delta Airlines speaking out, and I'm like, ugh. Can I
they
still
are, because there
drink
was
Coca-Cola?
boycott Delta was trending, and
Yeah.
boycott Coke was trending, which is ironic.
Yeah.
It's funny because boycott Coke was trending a few weeks ago from the right side of the political aisle because of their what was it? Don't be white, whatever the thing was, and now it's on the left. It's like Coca-Cola's getting it on
they're
both sides.
on both sides.
Yeah.
Taking it in both
They're hedging their
ends.
bets.
Yeah.
I just find it interesting how we need IDs for so many things, right? And all of a sudden, when you request an ID for voting, it's racist.
Right.
All of a sudden, I mean, think about it. You cannot have a car. You can't get a prescription in most cases, right? There's so many things. Why is all of a sudden a voter ID system such a crazy idea?
And the thing is, they're not even requesting it. So currently, voters are required to show their ID when they show up. So when Joe Biden said that this week, that was an outright lie.
He didn't know what he was talking about. He was
It's
just
no
an
different.
woman.
Right. There's no different. They are already required to show their ID in Georgia before this bill.
Good. Not here in Maryland.
I know. Right.
Now
right.
they're just
Maryland is
required.
not.
But
The only
anyways.
thing that the bill adds on is that in addition to having to show an ID in person, you now have to provide your ID when you're doing an absentee mail-in ballot.
Absentee,
So
right.
again, so your point is, if the voters already have to show ID, then what is the big controversy over extending it to mail-in voting, which we know from bipartisan commissions? There was the commission that was headed by
Voters
Jimmy
support
Carter,
that.
where they've shown that there is such an increased opportunity for fraud within mail-in voting, and also Georgia offers free state ID.
Yeah.
So I know one of the reasons
Yeah.
that's sometimes brought up is why voter ID would be unconstitutional or why
Right.
it's inherently racist is because it's like a poll tax. But Georgia
Right.
offers a free state ID.
Free state ID.
So my question is it only racist because they are saying it only applies to black people? I'm just thinking this out because if an Asian American or a white person, let's say they didn't have an ID or were not able to get one, would it be considered racist then?
Right.
Or
It makes no sense.
is it
So,
only
the
tunnel
whole-
vision towards, narrowly focused on black people?
Well,
Anything black or anything that supposedly affects black people is going to automatically be deemed racist.
But it's a very insulting focus because
that is
basically it's
insulting.
saying that black
Yes.
people aren't capable or competent enough to get an ID.
That's what I mean. Yeah, because they're only singling out black people to say that it's racist. Any other group or person who for some reason who was not able to get an ID, it would be no problem. It would not
The
even
other
be an
thing
issue.
is, let's say somebody, so the argument a lot of the times is, they don't have the documentation necessary in order to eventually get this ID, right? Okay, so then put things in power that allow people, if they're missing certain documentation, help
Right.
them attain the documentation.
But also, again, black people don't have the documentation to
Exactly.
get an ID.
Right. But to your point, okay, if they don't, for whatever reason, then put things in place that enable people to get what they don't have.
Right. Why
Like you said,
not
just
set
get an
up
ID for other
transportation
things.
to MVA or to the Social Security office or wherever you have to get your state approved, your state ID?
Yeah.
Then why can't you set up the transportation and all kinds of charity, if you will, to allow that to happen so that they can be rightfully and have the right ID to vote?
To me, it seems like they just want to have any and everybody vote as many times as you want,
Right.
and whoever, whether you registered or not, you vote. And that's what it makes it, because it's no excuse for why they are against this bill.
How are they gonna stand by voter integrity? That's what I want to know. What are they gonna put in place to promote voter integrity?
And
They
nothing.
don't have any ideas. They're just against any ideas.
Well, everything that they have, I keep saying progressive is regressive because
It
everything, they keep just harkening back to the past and they keep going backwards. And all that they're doing, you see that their go-to attack is always Jim Crow. They know that racism is really the third rail in American society because of our history of it in this country. So, there are very real wounds and they keep just picking at the wounds because for political purposes, because they know that they can, and they know that they can use it to their advantage to just play on this, history of trauma. Like Biden came out and said it's Jim Crow 2.0. I mean, these are just really vicious, vituperative attacks.
Again, they create the situation, they create the need, they create the supposed racist category or racist circumstances, and then they try to have systems or checks and balances that don't work.
And not only that, but for all their cries about how conservatives or Republicans are trying to disenfranchise voters. Black voting is up. Black voting is up.
Yes.
Black voting is up, and black Republican voting is up. Yes. So why would Republicans want to suppress black vote?
Exactly.
It makes no sense. And people need to actually
There's so much outrage right now.
Right. And not only that, it says here, and then they keep talking about this, but the bill has actually made a lot of changes to help people get votes. Voters can now request an absentee ballot starting 11 weeks before
and
the
they
election.
have to send ID along with it
11
now, right?
days before the election, a
shouldn't
change
be that
that
off.
better fits the U.S. Postal Service's delivery standards.
Right.
So
'cause
if
we
the
know how
Democrats
abysmal
had their
that's
way, I really believe that if the Democrats had their way, they would have carte blanche voting at least beginning January 1 of the election year up until November,
It makes
whatever
no
that date happens to
sense.
be.
It makes no sense to continue to prolong the voting. That was another thing that kind of irritates
I know.
me.
I don't
Well,
like
now
that
we
at
have
all.
voting months, voting year. Well, we got
Right.
voting.
Yeah,
Yeah,
because
you're right.
You're going to have a never-ending campaign.
And that's what I think. That's what they want.
Decision on
That's what
a
they want.
particular day. It has to be limited. Otherwise, there's no way to say that a group of people, that the country as a whole, made a decision based on the evidence that everyone had, based on the information that everyone had at one particular time.
Look at
You
the
got
pictures.
people changing their minds.
Look at the pictures during the Civil
year.
Rights era, and you would see lines and lines of people standing in line to vote, to exercise their franchise, to exercise their vote. It wasn't all, oh, I can't get there, or I need weeks. They did it on that day.
Or I'm dying of thirst in the line. That's
Well,
the
that
other
was another
ridiculous.
thing.
Well, there's so much hyperbole because, okay, now when we went out and I worked the polls for Eugene
So did
Boycott,
I, yeah.
right? And we were all there at the polls for our various candidates, and so we set up, and we were so excited about setting up, coffee and donuts for people in line, and we were far enough back from where the line is that you can't do electioneering past this point. But we were out there passing out coffee and donuts, so and I enjoyed that. But I understand that what they're saying is not that you have to keep people waiting in these long lines and they're dying of thirst and you're not allowed to give a dying person water. You're not allowed as a candidate to go and campaign by using
That's what they're saying.
gifts.
I have been an election judge several times. I've been the chief judge a couple of times. I've been a poll worker.
Yes, and poll workers are allowed to put out water, food, and drink.
The election judge, I've had to go outside and make sure the line was cut off and keep the electioneers back. But that was it. People were not dying of thirst. They were not falling out.
No, and that's what this bill does. It says, so now you can still bring water and food, but now you have to give food or water to the poll workers. So the poll workers, and they can give it out.
No, poll workers are not going to. I doubt if poll workers. Now some may. Let me say that. That's not what the poll workers there for.
Right.
That is not what the poll workers there for. So that's not going to fly. I don't think.
But you could set up a water station if it really. But I think that the governor.
Why can't you just bring your own cup with water in it?
You're not in the desert. You're not in the middle of the Sahara.
Well, they did do that at the polling place where I voted last in 2020. The poll workers did come around with water.
Right.
That's fine.
All it is you cannot wear the campaign shirt of who you are campaigning
and say,
for.
here's a bottle of water, here's a Starbucks.
Even if that was not, even if poll workers did not do that, you're not standing in line for 24/7 without food or water.
Right.
Bring a cup, bring a Pepsi,
Some people did.
or
Some
a bottle of
people come
water.
right out of work and they don't have anything.
Bring your own.
But the other
Again,
thing is,
the government does not need to supply you with food or water to go vote.
That's not going to stop you from voting. And the other thing is, I think that the governor made a really good point. He said, why are people waiting in these long lines for hours? And he pointed out that the polling places that have the worst track records of this are in Democrat-controlled places. Why? So fix
we'll
that.
go for your point.
So this is just a goofy little point, but think about how long people wait in line to get into clubs. And then when they get into the club, they need a voter ID. They need an ID to get in the club. You are telling me you can't, or this big deal about going into a place. You go to the grocery store.
Yes.
Give me a break.
Remember the toilet paper shortage? How many people were waiting in lines at Wegmans?
It's about priorities. It's about priorities.
I would bet that most people that are complaining about these voter rules would wait in a long club line just to get in.
Yeah, I know they
Or
would.
an amusement park line.
Right.
It's so dumb.
Well, we will continue to follow that. Hopefully, this spreads across the country because
we're following directions.
Right. We'll continue to follow that story. So next, we will move on to Shelly.
Okay, back to our friend, our perpetual friend here, the Mosby. This is one half of the Mosby team, Marilyn Mosby herself again. And to your surprise, audience, you may be surprised to find out that I kind of support Miss Mosby in some of her permanent changes that she's making. So last week, she gave a press conference about the permanent changes that she's making regarding non-violent crimes. The non-violent crimes, as you were talking about earlier, we were talking about, include sex workers, minor drug offenses, some other traffic violations, some other misdemeanors that her office is no longer going to prosecute. Why, you ask? Because she says she has data that shows that, number one, overall arrests are down. Non-violent crime has been down. And during the pandemic, she initiated this experiment, is what she called it, but now it's being made permanent. So she's going to look to use those resources that she's saving prosecuting these crimes to focus on violent crimes. I want to go on the record, because I know many of you may think that we're not fair when we talk about the Mosbys, but I do want to go on the record. She did clarify violent crimes and non-violent crimes. Jump in, everybody.
I have a problem with it. One problem is, and I've thought about this, because I understand that there is a natural reaction to say, yeah, what's the problem? What's the problem with these low-level crimes? And they're nonviolent, and who's getting hurt? And prostitution, if you decide you want to sell your body for sex, like who's that hurting, right? So it's very easy, I think, to find that way of thinking attractive. It makes a certain amount of sense on like a first order level. However, one thing that I know that you have a concern with is that she, again, we talked about the rogue prosecutors. She is acting she's acting outside of her authority. Right. So the first concern is that she's usurping the role of the legislature.
She's not a legislator. She is elected, but she's not a legislator.
She's not allowed to make law. Right. Her job, the reason why she's elected, is to enforce the law. So on just a fundamental level, the system falls apart if you have prosecutors in the executive branch taking on the role of the legislative branch, and they are deciding whole cloth. Right. Not that they're just going to pursue their own prosecutorial discretion in individual cases based on the fact pattern in those cases, but that they are going to just wholesale decide that something that the legislature has decided, that the people of the state have voted in their representatives to pass a law and say this is a crime that we want prosecuted, and she's going to say, I'm not doing it.
So as we've talked about before, Marilyn Mosby is sort of a part of this rogue prosecutor reform efforts that have swept across the country. So this idea to not prosecute low-level offenses is sweeping across the country. California, Seattle, a couple of other places throughout the country. What did you say? Philadelphia. They have already initiated these processes, if you will, to not prosecute these low-level offenses. And again, during COVID, there's some spurious data here because COVID was already sort of an anomaly. So one of the things that she mentioned was that arrests were down, or the crime is down overall. Well, that's going to happen when you're not arresting people automatically.
Well,
she kept saying that.
COVID, I mean, I'd just be curious to see the study during non-COVID times.
Exactly.
For Baltimore specifically, because also, like, maybe people don't want to prostitute during COVID times.
People weren't outside the
So that's the anomaly that she's basing most of her data on, at least in her press conference.
And even the chief of police, he said earlier, because now she's trying to use the COVID data, the data from 2020 to back up as like data that reinforces her position that this experiment has been working. But even before the press conference, the police chief had come out and he said that this is likely due to the decrease in robberies and assaults and things like that are kind of street crimes, that the likelihood is that it's because of COVID, and crime experts have cautioned that you
those are opportunities and they have not. So they were people were locked down. So that was the opportunity was not there to commit these crimes at the rate at which they had been prior to COVID-19.
Maybe some of the people committing these crimes have some sense and that they don't want.
Well, there's a lack of opportunity.
We'll
like if you think for robberies and assaults, if you don't have the opportunity, people are shut down, businesses are shut down, people weren't going out to eat, people weren't out at night, clubs were shut down. So I mean, there's just a natural correlation between the fact that the city was shut down and those kinds of crimes decreased because it didn't have an effect on the
It didn't have an effect on the violent crimes.
Not at all.
Violent crimes are still above and still continuing. As of today's date, we've had 69 murders year to date in Baltimore City. Again, since Marilyn Mosby has been in office for 6 years, we've had 300 plus every year since she's been in office.
Let me just jump back because there is data, like you mentioned, across the country of these. They've done research on it. They've analyzed 67,553 misdemeanor cases in Boston, Winthrop, Revere, Chelsea from 2004 to 2018. So these places where they have decided not to prosecute low-level offenses. So it does say low-level nonviolent misdemeanors like shoplifting, drug possession, motor vehicle offenses, where people are 58% less likely to commit another crime if they are not prosecuted in these crimes.
Now, on the other side, Sean Kennedy, I think, from the Maryland Public Policy Institute, his argument was that these crimes, or so-called quality of life crimes, they can be precursors to violent crimes or to some people committing violent crimes. So I understand this argument. Some people are saying, well, we don't want prostitutes, or we want the drug offenders or abusers prosecuted. Well, there's also a growing movement more so to not get these people prosecuted, but to get them help. And at Marilyn Mosby's press conference, I think his name is Mr. Wiggins, if I'm not mistaken, from the Baltimore behavioral something acronym.
Yeah. Baltimore Crisis Response.
Crisis. So they're going to treat these crimes or these people as patients, in a sense, clients. They're going to treat them for their behavior, drug abuse, and try to get them the help instead of being prosecuted. People have asked me, what do you think? I've said to you all, I'm libertarian on this. My position is that if you are a consenting adult, and I relegate only to adults, not children. If you are a consenting adult, I think you can sell your body however you choose it, if that's what you want to use to make your income between consenting adults. That's number one. Drug abusers who are non-violent, have not committed robbery, have not committed murder, I do think they can keep shooting up the drugs for themselves. And if they go to get help, then that's what the help is there for. That's what those programs are there for. So I am a libertarian on that. And I do think there is a decrease in cost of the prosecution, the arrest, the going through the court program, the court circuit, if you will, to continuously arrest and prosecute these types of crimes.
Now, let me ask you about that, because one thing she did mention is that due to not prosecuting these low-level offenses, now she has the resources to put towards these violent crimes. But the crime is still spiking, so that's what I didn't understand.
The homicide is still spiking.
And the clearance rate is still low. And also, she's presenting this as if this is just the result of her latest experiment, which she called the COVID criminal justice experiment. But she actually announced this in January of 2019. She announced that she was going to stop prosecuting drug possession regardless of weight, regardless of weight, criminal history, or your intent to distribute.
And because the weight is important, because the weight shows intent, or it's some evidence of intent to distribute.
Yeah,
so the weight
already, I mean, we're focusing so much on the fact that we want to eliminate these low-level prosecution for low-level offenses, and if people want to smoke a blunt or whatever, that shouldn't be criminal, but it's already decriminalized. It's a civil offense.
It's a civil offense.
10 grams. So what Mosby is saying is that regardless of how much you have, and she doesn't stipulate, as far as I can understand from what she's said in her statement, she doesn't say marijuana, she says drugs.
She says drugs. In her statement, she says drugs. Initially, at one time she mentioned...
weight or criminal history or intent to distribute.
At one time she mentioned last year, I think she
That was
mentioned
something I had
marijuana. This time she did not specifically say marijuana.
said
She said drug
drug
possession.
possession.
Yeah, because
And you know, a little bit of bath salts can make you do all kinds of crazy.
Well,
Well,
also
because
there's-
like I personally don't care about things like marijuana, right?
Yeah.
So like
If you're
I do
in
think
your
that's
home,
a waste
if you're
of time.
smoking
Right,
something,
what
I don't
about
think
bath
anyone
salts?
cares.
Right.
What about
but
bath
that's different,
salts?
right?
Okay.
Like if
I mean, if people want to be in their house smoking bath salts, I don't care either.
Oh,
I
you
used to be a
care
resident
because
assistant.
No, I'm talking about
salts
individual.
drive you crazy.
Right,
No,
right.
You want high on bath salts? They're coming through
Hey,
your
they
wall.
have to be responsible for themselves. That's the thing. If
Yes.
look, okay. I think there's different levels.
I think
right,
so.
of
I
drugs.
smoking
And
bath
there
salts?
are- No. I'm just saying there are. If you are endangering someone,
Right.
is different
It's
than
different
if you
than you
make a choice to endanger
yourself.
and you cannot endanger.
I agree with
others,
you on that.
Right. So, do I think you should endanger yourself?
No.
No. But at some point, there's personal responsibility in there, right? Which is what I think they should do with the masks and everything else.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I'll take that on my
right, like
own.
when I was a resident assistant at University of Maryland, I hated being called for like a marijuana, checking on people for marijuana. What a waste of time.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then we would have to call the university police and have them waste their time on it. And I'm like, there's other things that are more important for your time. So I understand some of the petty nonviolent stuff, but I do have questions of like, okay, what about all these opioid addictions and all these heroin and all this? We don't want more. We don't want to incentivize people that
Right.
it's okay for them to have needles all over the streets. and
Well, see, those are going to be
be
some of the unintended consequences of
Right.
this.
Because I
How are
want
we
us to
going
be
to
like
how
San
are we going to
Francisco.
manage that? If we're managing this as a behavioral or public health, like they talk about all the time, public health perspective, then how are we going to do that? Because there are going to be some unintended consequences. There's
don't
always
want that
unintended
line,
consequences
like
with government
San Francisco.
policies.
And the other thing is, so I remember when I went to Amsterdam. Right, Amsterdam has a whole different world on prostitution. You go in the red light district and it's legal prostitution
Yeah. Right.
everywhere.
You went there?
Yeah, I was there. Like
Okay.
you literally
You can do that in
walk
Vegas.
through. Right, you literally walk through the city and there's
No, I think
rooms
it's not
with
legal in
windows of
other
girls
places.
like
on the strip.
winking at you and stuff. Right, so. But like I remember there's a prostitution museum in Amsterdam, which was really interesting. And they had this wall of pictures of women who died through legal prostitution, right? So it's like, okay, it's legal. They put all these safeguards and stuff like buttons for safety in there, but like it's incredibly dangerous. It's such an dangerous
One of the
industry.
things, Xandria, to your point about keeping the city clean, because one of the items in this non-violent offense that Marilyn Mosby mentioned was the defecation and urination on the streets.
That's
So
a problem.
that's going to be more than a public nuisance. That is going to be a public health
risk.
That's going to be a public health risk.
They do it. You know,
Yeah.
if you go downtown to City Hall, you can step in human poop.
So what's going to happen, what I predict is going to happen, we're going to see spider pots all over the city now.
Oh, please.
Or
They're
in
gonna
more
have
places.
these people pooping on the street.
Well, I'm just telling you, I can see that we're going to have spider pots all over the city, right next to those red light cameras or speed cameras on the streets. You're going to have
It already
that's not
smells
even
like
gonna make
pee.
a challenge.
It's-
I don't know if it'll make a difference,
It
but we're
smells
going
like
to see
pee
that.
all down there.
Right. The challenge is, are you realistically gonna
Yeah.
arrest everybody, every homeless person that pees on the
Yeah.
street?
No.
But at the same time, just saying, oh, it's now legal to do this, incentivize more of it to
And the
happen?
needle exchange
Yes.
programs are coming.
That's
All of these things are
problematic.
coming. That's going to be
Yeah.
problematic. We see the heroin or the methadone clinics now. Wait until the needle exchange comes in full force.
I think overall it's good intentioned and it's good, but I do think
that
there are going
happens
to
a
be
lot with
some.
government
I know,
programs.
right? I think there are going to be a lot of like negative consequences.
Yeah, and not only that, but I mean, my biggest, I guess, the reason why I would support it is because she's saying that the resources will be moved from that and moved towards tackling violent crime. But I haven't seen it. I mean,
We haven't seen that. And she's had a whole year, at least a whole year to move those resources so that violent crime should have also been decreasing at the same time this program, the decrease in this program has been shown.
In 2019 and 2020, it did not make a difference, and it didn't make a difference in the clearance rate. And one of her justifications was that you would free up the resources to be able to pursue, the homicide cases, and it has not done anything.
So that would be the question: when is that going to kick in or take effect, along with the other topics and the issues that we have just talked about regarding this program?
And
I don't know.
Just really quick, last note. I think a lot of people's argument for it is, it's going to reverse the effects of the crime bill.
Well,
right?
that's what I wanted to talk about.
Right. If it reverses the effects of the crime bill, great, but like at the expense of what?
Of what?
Right. So that's kind of the. Obviously, I do want to reverse the effects of the crime bill, but like
because
again,
that's what
at
she
the
started
expense
off. That's
of
how
what?
she framed this.
Yes.
She framed this as under the era of the civil rights, the war on drugs, the discrimination against, she said, black people, brown and black people, and so these offenses have historically been used against brown and black people. So that's how she framed this. In her thinking, in her mind, this is a reversal of that. She's again reforming and correcting and restoring the systemic racism. So that's what she's doing. Yeah.
So that's the challenge. It's like how much? What's the balance?
Right. And not only, and speaking of the press conference, she had a totally different look. We saw it. I thought it was Rachel Dolezal up there. She took out her weave. She took out her weave. She had these glasses on and a natural hair and a little spongy.
Little spongy on the end.
Is she trying to say, I don't have money to pay for this stuff?
No, I think it was just a bad hair day. She was about to go to the hair salon.
Maybe. It just seems off.
The day before. When you wear weaves, I don't wear them, but when you wear weaves, you have to give your hair a little bit of time to breathe.
Well, she never breathed before the investigation because she always had the weave in, and she gets on this with glasses. She never even had glasses on. What is she trying to do? She's changing her image?
Depending on the subject matter.
She still had the camera still caught one of her signature looks with her lip turned up. They still had that signature look on there. They got one of those catches. So.
And what were you were going to mention something about?
Well, I just wanted to explore that a little bit more. What are the externalities? What are the unintended consequences? With your first order and second order effects. So I think that a lot of times, like I said, the initial reaction is to listen to the language that she's using, like restorative justice, and like you said, she's couching it in the ethics of the civil rights movement, right? So she announced, today America's war on drug users is over in the city of Baltimore. We leave behind the era of tough on crime prosecution, and we will no longer criminalize mostly people of color for addiction. But the thing is, okay, so do you guys know the parable of Chesterton's fence?
No, I don't know.
So Chesterton's fence. So it's a heuristic for understanding, for looking at things when you're making a change, when you seek to reform something. So the arrogant, impetuous reformer, the progressive, is going to look at come across a fence in the road and say, "Oh my God, why would someone put a fence in the middle of the road? It must be torn down." But the thoughtful reformer looks at the fence and says, before I can remove this fence, I must first understand what led someone to build the fence in the first place, because fences just don't grow out of the ground.
Thomas Sowell would say that's stage one and then stage two thinking, basically. So
you have to understand what are the second and third order effects of something. And you have to understand the purpose of a legislation before you try to remove it, because there are these unintended consequences. And I think that they are going to be dire, because when you look at this movement that's sweeping across the country, from San Francisco to these other cities where these rogue prosecutors have been elected with the influx of George Soros money and these dirty money organizations, right? So if you just look at San Francisco, where the prosecutor, the DA in San Francisco, he made the same kind of announcement that Marilyn Mosby did, that he would know, and he did this in 2019 as well. So he said he was going to pursue a restorative justice, harm reduction approach in San Francisco. And San Francisco, as a result, they're seeing a historic drug crisis. They've got an uptick in murders. Murders went up 35%. Burglaries, assaults. There are overdoses. They're at 700 fatal overdoses in 2020, which were 3 times the COVID deaths. And so in 2019, he said he was going to stop prosecuting quality of life crimes. So including prostitution, public camping, public urination, and defecation. And as a result, you have a typhoid outbreak. You have a typhus outbreak. outbreak.
Hepatitis.
You have So I mean, there were some rumors of bubonic plague outbreaks in San Francisco and in Los Angeles, where they're also pursuing the same kind of non-prosecution policy. And then you have this homelessness epidemic. You have tent cities. You have public defecation, public urination.
People
and
high
you have,
and sitting in
they're
their
not,
piss.
Yeah, and so the shopkeepers now, like we mentioned a couple weeks ago, can't even call the police because they're not prosecuting shoplifting. So you basically are destroying a community. Because think about what you're talking about. If somebody's doing bath salts in the privacy of their own home, what does it matter?
Versus in a restaurant.
It doesn't matter unless it's really spilling out into the public square. So that's the differences between private and public.
But that's so hard to it's hard to stop that.
No, but this
It's
is
hard to stop
also
that.
because the person doing bath salts alone likely also does it not alone. You know
But
what I mean?
matter. There are certain drugs that you do.
I agree.
Let's ask this: if the person alone, by him or herself, doing bath salts and does no harm to anyone else, or only him or herself, what are you prosecuting?
But
you
that's
can't
the
just
thing.
say
No
they
one
are.
either. But this is
They
the thing.
are wasting the resource time of
I think
medical
so.
professionals.
But
that
you cannot
could be,
distinguish it. How many people don't do something versus the ones that do?
No, but
you look
no,
at
I know.
Florida. You have
Yeah.
these people walking out into traffic, stopping traffic. Man's going out butt naked, high off a
And
bath
again,
salt.
we would typically call those nuisance crimes or quality of life to some
Yes,
degree,
and
and we
public
are having
decency.
recent.
I think
Yeah.
it's
Morality.
interesting,
Right.
quality of life crimes. I just think
Exactly.
that's an interesting term because to me that makes that just I don't know.
Basically,
think
you're a
about
public
less
nuisance, so you're disturbing the
important.
quality of life for everyone else.
Yes,
Yeah.
but also think about what is going to happen to these cities, just like in San Francisco, where they're basically a cesspool of
Such a mess.
crime
Such a
and
mess.
immorality. You have drug cartels moving in now. So think about businesses, how we're trying to attract businesses to Baltimore. And think about also the cycle of poverty and crime, and how unemployment also is a factor in low-level crime, right? Well, you're not going to attract businesses to Baltimore if you've got people defecating in front of the business.
Let me ask you this. This
You've
begs the
got
question
people
then.
prostituting themselves, and you cannot call the police. You do not have that recourse because they will not arrest, because she will not prosecute. Think
Well,
about
let me
what's
ask you
going to
this
happen to the
then.
city.
Again, when you just said the economic effect, then before this policy, these crimes were being prosecuted, and we still didn't attract the businesses here. We still haven't attracted the businesses here, enough business to employ the city of Baltimore.
that's
I don't think the answer to that is then say,
Yeah,
we're
I
not
know.
I'm not
investing
saying
them at
that,
all.
but I'm just saying to think about it. So then what do we do? What are we left with? What do? We still have to do something.
If you accurately and efficiently put together a crime plan,
and they
you're
haven't done
basing
that.
that off of a half-done crime plan.
'Cause
So
she hasn't
the crime
prosecuted
plan,
them
the
anyway.
crime
She
plan.
wouldn't be having a problem of reduced police force if all these defunding the police efforts were not in place.
Remember the violence reduction framework that we talked about that Mayor Scott mentioned a few weeks ago. So this is all a part of that. This is all some branches of that. Because remember, in that program, in that framework, crime or prosecuting crimes was, I think, not even mentioned.
They didn't even mention
They
the
didn't
police.
mention it. Exactly.
And also, that Baltimore, what was it called? Baltimore Crime Response.
the
Baltimore
Trauma Task
Crisis
Force.
Response.
Yeah.
No, but this organization that Mr. Wade,
yes.
they're getting $45 million from the state. And he was asked at that press conference who was paying
And
for
he
this.
said no government funds.
No, what he said was, because they said, is this taxpayer funded? He
said no.
Wait, he said no, it's not taxpayer funded, the government's paying for it. I almost fell out of my chair when I heard him say that. It's not taxpayer funded, it's government funded.
Well,
So
I
all
will
of
say
this is
this.
gonna be
I will say
taxpayer
this.
funded, of course.
I actually used to work for Baltimore County Crisis Response, and it's invaluable system. You have people calling who you do things over the phone, and then you send. They have a crisis response team that goes out and handles situations where you have people on drugs or people about to commit suicide.
Yeah, and there's a place
things
for that.
like that.
There's a place for that, and I don't know that we have sort of now. I don't want to perfected the system for that, because if I see crisis responders and social workers going out to some of these crime sites for police officers, I think they're going to be in more jeopardy. I think it's going to exacerbate the situation.
I agree.
Because those workers are typically not armed. So that means the police are not only going to have to be mindful of the criminal who could be armed and may very well be armed, and they have these other people that they have to be mindful of as well.
But they wouldn't go out. They wouldn't be out. I thought they're going out in place of the police.
Maybe. I mean, they may be. They may be.
Think of like a domestic violence or domestic assault.
Yeah, those are the most
dangerous.
Exactly.
They are the most dangerous.
Right. So they want a lot of fund the police efforts. They don't want police to go to
right.
And
that's
what
this is going to
right. And I'm like, they are the most dangerous situations.
And I just want to touch on because the kind of the Jim Crow rhetoric is kind of a thread throughout our topics.
Everything.
And so did you guys read the new Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander, where she talks about the mass incarceration system? So I had read that in 2016, and that shaped my thinking a lot. But the premise of it is actually false, and the data is false, which I did not realize at the time because I took it at face value. And that is really the problem here with, I think, a lot of these restorative justice approaches of these rogue prosecutors, because the underlying premise is false. So it's based on a misunderstanding of what was driving mass incarceration rates. Did you know, and this surprised me, only 0.1% of all people in prison are actually in prison solely for marijuana possession. It is not non-violent, low-level drug crimes that are driving the mass incarceration rate. Only 16% of state prisoners are in prison for drug crimes, and only 5% of those are non-violent and low-level. So this idea that we have, been targeting black people in this war on drugs, and that's why we have this over-criminalization of black people, it was not driven by low-level drug
No, it wasn't
offenses.
driven.
It was driven by the murder rates, the violent crime rate that was skyrocketing, and black people were the primary victims, right?
Of the black people, by black people.
Of the population,
and that's the statistic they always use.
Of the homicide victims.
But that's the statistic they always use. Black people are 13%, 12% of the population, but yet we are disproportionately incarcerated for whatever crimes, even some of these non-violent and violent crimes.
Right.
But the underlying premise is wrong. They start from the wrong premise.
Would their murder victims agree? Right.
Exactly.
Well, they're starting from a lie, and a lot of this social justice ideology is based on a fallacy. It is based on a lie, and they are using it just to drive the racial narrative instead of looking at what are the real causes of the crime, who are the people who are being most affected. And in this case, also, the Drug Policy Alliance is funded by George Soros, and they're the ones that are driving a lot of the legalization of marijuana efforts, which I just think is interesting because it just tends to come back to that again. And he's the one that was funding Marilyn Mosby, so he's the one that's driving these legalization efforts for marijuana. And I think it is just going to devastate Black and brown communities, which are the ones that she claims that she wants to help.
So we have some comments that we want to respond to. So let's see here. We have Cynthia Gross. Thank you for watching. Says the SAO has announced a crisis prevention response team.
Well, actually, without the state's attorney talked about that. Mayor Scott announced that, I don't know, a couple of months ago, earlier this year, the trauma response team and the BCRI now, who are going to be responding to some of these non-violent crimes. So the SAO, the state's attorney's office, Marilyn Mosby, mentioned part of that strategy in addressing these non-violent situations.
So she also says the stats are for what year? I guess responding to your stats from
which one? They're all recent. They're all
2019 to 2020.
Okay, and so she says under O'Malley locked up folk for petty quality of life crimes under zero tolerance, and that's what I was going to bring up too, because under the broken windows, which has been pretty, it's been hailed as very helpful in the reduction of crime in places like New York City, essentially casting a very wide net over spaces, essentially asking everyone who was all hauled in to prove they are not a bad guy. So
they started from the wrong premise. Basically, it was lock up, arrest, and then ask questions later.
Right.
Basically. And so those people, some of the lawsuits were based on their Fourth Amendment. They were not given the proper search and seizure, First Amendment maybe, things like that. The question I think that we need to ask Baltimoreans again is, what is your idea of quality of life? Do you want these programs, the needle exchange or the defecation, God forbid, on the streets, all of these types of nonviolent offenses to not be prosecuted? Because ultimately it's affecting us as Baltimoreans.
Do you want a typhoid epidemic in the city?
Right.
Do you want an overdose epidemic?
How do we handle
astronomically high
the drug
ODs.
abusers, the sex workers? Again, I'm libertarian on the sex workers. Your body, your choice. So how do we want to deal with that? I mean, we have to answer these questions.
I understand, like, with a lot of the drug users. I mean, you watch all those different drug shows, right? How people get trapped in that system, and they don't even want to be in it, right? Young kids, minors, fathers, and they don't want to be in it. And, like, it is a complicated system.
Yes.
It's definitely a complicated system. So I don't think, right, you want to imprison all those people necessarily, but like there does have to be something in place, because if all of a sudden there's no penalty or anything,
Exactly.
There are no guardrails, there's no
it's
structure.
just an incentive.
Well, not only
to do
that,
it.
right? Not only that, but then you look at our society. So on one hand, you're telling people that you're going to deregulate drugs, and you say it's okay, and then on the other hand, you have social media, you have the media, these shows pushing drug use.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
I think it's
We
been
can't
a real,
have it both ways.
No, there's been a real
Yeah.
concerted effort, not just towards, because I think decriminalizing, like we have in Maryland, where it's a civil offense, you have under 10 grams, and it's just personal use, you're in your home, I don't think anybody
Right.
cares, right?
Yeah, nobody
The thing is, that's being conflated with what is actually happening, where
Right.
Marilyn Mosby is saying, I'm just wholesale not going to prosecute crimes,
Right.
and crimes that affect the community. And these things, like even, in the Netherlands you mentioned, where they were the first country to legalize prostitution in 2000,
It's so dangerous.
it's been a catastrophe.
Yeah.
Even within 1 year, child sex trafficking
It's
increased
more
by
dangerous.
300%.
But I guess it's more dangerous than when it was
They're
illegal.
trying to-
Which
they're
happens a
looking
lot
to
with
heal
government
it.
programs.
Yes.
I guess the
What you
question
said, it's more dangerous.
It's more dangerous
Now.
now.
More dangerous and deadly being legal than
right.
when it
Organized
was
crime
illegal.
has
because the
moved
government, we said this last week, government programs rarely, treat or intervene positively for the crime or the whatever purpose they were initiated.
Yes.
But one of the questions, again, we need to answer, or we need to figure it out. Do we prosecute these people? How do we handle them?
Well, they're
what are we going to do
already
with
How do
them?
you have some sort of accountability?
Yes, but
somewhere?
they're
We need the
already-
accountability, but is prosecution the answer?
No, but I don't think that any good prosecutor of integrity worth his salt wants to just throw people in jail for
Right, that's
extended
true.
sentences for small crimes. We already do have reforms in place that I think have been very necessary. Diversionary courts, treatment,
Right.
drug treatment.
But in order
drug
for them to get to
courts,
court and get
they
it
have
court
to be
mandated, they have to be
prosecuted.
arrested and prosecuted.
It's part
and
of
so
the-
Yeah, that's
yeah.
true.
that's
It's part
the
of the
part
process.
that comes
Maybe
in.
they get arrested and prosecuted, and their sentence is to go to.
So this
treatment.
plan,
And
this
that
permanent
happens
change,
already.
so this
That
permanent
happens a
change is
lot.
bypassing
Yeah.
the prosecution or an arrest of that,
Right.
Yeah,
and just
well,
taking them straight to the behavioral treatment.
I
A
think
lot
like
of people are thinking like arrest, immediate prison,
And it's not.
imprisonment.
And
Like,
that's
but it's
only
still a
misconception.
cost. It's still a
it is
cost. It's still a
right? And it
cost.
still goes on your record.
But it's
Yeah.
gonna cost,
It
but
does.
Shelly, it's a $45 million cost for this crisis center. that hasn't even
I agree with you. Again, there's some things we need to weigh and balance
Yeah.
and think about.
I think, like you said, there's a lot of good intentions.
Yep.
But I think there's going to be disastrous results, and I think
I
people
tend
need
to
to
fall
take a
on
step
that
back.
side. As libertarian as I am on some of these points that she made, knowing government and the history of government interventions, I tend to be more realistic or pessimistic that it's not going to work.
The journal.
I hope it works.
Yeah, we've all
I'm
hope it
not
works.
confident.
Go ahead.
There's a feminist journalist, Renate van der Zee, in the Netherlands, who has been following the legalization of prostitution for the past 21 years since it was legalized. And she said, we had the best intentions. We were sex positive. We believed in the individual rights of people to sell their bodies, right? Which is basically legalized slavery, I'm sorry. But anyway, she said we were reprehensibly naive.
When the
And not
government
only that, one
intervenes-
thing we have not mentioned: cutting balls and clits. If you get one, you get one pass, and then when you get bought in again, if you do, it's something, what's the medical word for that? Where you, I'm talking about sex work.
Sex work.
I mean, what's the medical word for it?
I can't even. I'm laughing.
No,
Sterilization.
Sterilization. Yes, sterilization.
Wait, who's sterilizing?
Government.
She
We
said
talking about
she said
government.
we haven't talked about that.
If you're getting caught and you know we haven't talked about that. I think they do it in China.
They do to the Uyghur population.
Yeah.
They're in
Right, yeah.
concentration
So I mean,
camps.
if these
Well, they also
people
have forced
wanna
abortions in China
but
too.
if they're going around defecating, urinating,
what are they gonna do with that? You defecate.
cut their colon or. Is it the prosecutor? Well, we'll move on.
A colonectomy.
Yeah, colonoscopy.
Colonectomy and clitorectomy.
Yeah, it's
And oophorectomy.
Whatever we can do. Give them
Oophorectomy.
a tube.
We're going to come up with the Pop and Politics crime plan.
Yeah.
Okay, on the next edition of Anatomy and Physiology.
Cut it off. Cut it off.
You see Xandria? She said, "What? What?" Because she's sick.
I just wanted to know where we were going.
I know.
All right.
Well, I thought we were going to social justice. I thought that was a great segue for the drag queen story.
Right. We'll go here to woke baby.
man. All right.
Wake the baby.
So the Washington Post,
I can't look at you. I can't look at you the rest of the show. I cannot look at you.
We tried to give all types of answers. We didn't say that.
I can't
Sterilization.
I'm going to look at you like this.
look, we can think outside the box.
Cutting colon.
We all need to think outside the box for some accountability measures.
That's
I
a whole
agree.
different shape.
It's a whole. All right, let's move on, guys. So, on March 18th, the Washington Post wrote an article called "Social Justice for Toddlers. These new books and programs start the conversation early." Then it was followed by, "In the era of Black Lives Matter and Me Too, many parents are wondering when the right time is to talk to their children about social justice. Experts say it's never too early, and a new wave of tools and resources can help start the conversation." So,
Never is the time.
yeah, they also go on to say that children develop implicit bias at 3 months old, and by 4 years old, they're categorizing and developing stereotypes. So
a babbling 3-month-old, you're going to explain the concept of racism and discrimination, or how not to be a 3-month-old.
So, like, look, if you put a ton of babies of different ethnicity in a room together, right, they might notice their different skin color. They're not going to think anything about it.
It's actually a good thing.
Yeah, they're not going to be racist. They're not. So the idea was like, oh, you're going to, being around the parents and the schools and society is going to make them racist, right?
Yeah.
And children are inherently racist in some ways. So I think that's ridiculous because I grew up around different races my entire life.
Your whole family.
My whole family.
At 3 months, you remember being racist?
I don't even remember anything at 3 months, number one.
No.
Right? Number two, I grew up in a multicultural family, but also, like, my best friend since kindergarten, met her at the bus stop, we've still been best friends since, was black, and is black, I should say, right? So, and, like, her family was, like, the mirroring light-skinned, dark-skinned version of my family. Her siblings are my siblings' age. We both have a foreign parent, right? Like, her father's from Africa originally, my mom's from Nicaragua, and I won't, like, go into the details, so she's not put on the spot, but, like, both of our parents, we both had another parent from New York, etc., right?
Cool.
So, like, literally mirroring. And, like, she's still one of my best friends, and race never, ever came into the picture for me. I didn't even, you know what I mean? So, like,
it would be said that you have white privilege because you have the privilege to not even see race.
Right.
Do I have it right?
Meanwhile, I'm like all these different ethnicities, right?
Yeah.
But, like, actually, we loved that we were so similar but looked different. Like, we loved that. We celebrated that. So I knew about race at a very early age. I was always around. We had multiracial friends, multiracial family. Like, it never meant anything to me. My parents taught me that people come in different colors and shapes and sizes, etc., and we're all people. So that's if you're going to teach race to a child, that's what you should teach them.
And it's organic, it's natural.
Right.
It's about having those
Exactly.
personal relationships. What this is trying to do is to inculcate a dogma into children. It's about teaching them a prescribed
critical
way
race
of
theory.
thinking.
Right.
Yeah, the appropriate way of thinking. And it's a very, it's a dogmatic approach. And it really is a quasi-religious approach because this anti-racism dogma has become a religion.
Yeah. Oh, it is.
And you have to accept the orthodoxy.
And that's
you have to recite the liturgy. You have to repent of your original sin of your skin color privilege.
If not, you are a heretic.
Yeah, and then you have to perform acts of repentance or absolution.
The kneeling, the apologies.
Yes.
Let me read some of these different different programs and books and educational studies that the Washington Post was promoting. So we have musical classes that develop an understanding of gender and personhood. We have a drag queen story time that will soon be a
Gender
show.
and personhood? Gender
We have
and personhood?
books that discuss
what's the
intersectionality.
Starting at 3
Starting
months.
at 3 months. I mean, these are preschool
But wait,
books.
the drag queen wasn't the drag queen guy recently? Wasn't he
someone was arrested for
Wasn't
child
he recently
abuse?
arrested for child? Yeah.
So, right, there was. So this is the thing. I actually did
What's
some.
that say? Fag and...
What? So it's
Fag.
No,
Oh,
Faye and Huffy.
Faye and Huffy.
I'm sorry.
Story time.
I'm sorry. I was like, what?
So this is the other thing that,
Woke baby.
Look,
Oh my
you know,
God.
first of all,
Most people
of
want their
course-
babies asleep. Most mothers, you want your
Right,
babies
yeah,
to sleep. Now you
of
want. Oh
course,
my
I
gosh.
believe in equality for all people. I have friends in the LGBT community. I love them all, right? But I think there's a difference between teaching people something and confusing them. And like when you're talking to a child, right? Like the majority of the U.S. I was actually looking at these studies from like the UCLA School of Law Williams Institute. This is a 2019. They did like a Gallup poll, right? So it was the number of LGBT individuals per state.
Yeah.
And actually, the state actually the Washington D.C. It was Washington D.C. and all the states.
Okay.
So the state that had the largest population of LGBT was Washington, D.C., 9% of the population. Following that, Oregon had the following next largest at 5.6% of the population's LGBT, and every state under that decreased in size.
It's
so,
really
like,
about 1 to
if you
2%
think-
of the population.
Yeah.
So
And
not to
0.5% is trans.
Right,
It's
like-
infinitesimal.
Now they have a new hand thing now. So it's rainbow, and now trans is pastel.
I don't even know.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so
It's
but
like the
my
rainbow
point is,
colors, and now
when
trans
you make
is
a
pastel.
show to a minor about drag queens, right? You're making it sound like the majority of the population are drag queens, and not okay. So there's a minority of the populations that is LGBT, and then there's a piece of that. Not even all LGBT are drag queens.
Right.
You know what I mean? So like you're confusing a
And
child.
that's performative. That doesn't have anything to do with sexual orientation.
Right,
like
right.
you're putting on a costume. That's performative.
Right.
And it's inherently sexual in nature. It's a it's a sexualized performance.
Like I think there's a difference between, like I know some of my gay friends they love the drag queen stuff, right?
Yeah,
And that's great.
I've been to drag shows.
I've been to drag shows.
But those are for adults.
Yes,
First of
exactly.
all, right, when a lot of that is exotic dancing and stuff. That's not a child
No, it's
thing.
not.
And two, like there's a time and a place to tell your child, like, hey, yeah, this is a thing for some men, and you know what I mean.
I mean,
So what?
I
Who
wouldn't
cares?
suspect that being 5 would be the time.
Right,
Five
exactly.
years
So
would
that's
be
a
the time to
problem.
do that.
Let parents decide when they want to teach their children
Well,
about
I think
certain
this
things.
is part of what I think is happening. They don't
want
want
the parents
parents
to teach.
exactly.
I
They
know.
don't even want parents to be in charge of their own children. They want children to have a panoply of parents, all different skin tones and races. Back to this issue of race in general. I teach my kid that there's only one race, which is why I say I'm an American.
Human race.
Human race. That's right. Human American. That's who I am. And it's one race. Blood is 99.99% alike. There's a very, very small percentage of our blood that's different. So I'd say one race, this ideology with black race and white race and whatever, Hispanic, whatever it may be, I think it's diabolical. I think it's confusing, number one.
confusing.
It is very
That's the
confusing.
biggest thing.
Children are not born and they don't typically grow up, oh, well, you're black and I'm white and you're racist or I'm not. Or what? They don't do that. That is a learned behavior.
And there's a difference between, for instance, with the LGBT, and there's a whole, so much more to talk about. But for instance, there's a difference of a kid going up to you and being like, hey, mom, I'm gay, or hey, mom, I'm lesbian. And then you teaching them, like, okay, that's fine. Like, we still love you, blah, 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 blah. And you working around that versus confusing a child who about like, oh, you can be whatever you want to be.
And there's a big difference between that and the government and these activists putting young children as young as 5 on these, these puberty blockers and things like that, and performing gender reassignment surgery on young girls, performing mastectomies on them when they are under the age of consent. And if parents object, now the parents are going to lose control of their children. And I mean, that is child abuse. It's child sexual abuse.
It's destroying the innocence of our children.
So one of these alphabet books, it was called A is for, or they have like A is for activist, T is for trans, etc. Right? And it just made me think of I always remember my mom talking about when she lived in Nicaragua and the Sandinistas took over, and they would actually take the high school students and have them educate the elementary school students on things. And it was this very like anti-American rhetoric, right? They would teach everything in an anti-American way. And like, I just feel like that's kind of in a different lens. That's what's happening here. You have like the government educating people on how they should think, but they're putting what they want people to think.
Well, it's indoctrination.
I was going to say,
and they're doing it. They've been doing it in colleges for generations now. And I mean, it was a deliberate approach. It was the long march through the institutions from the Frankfurt School. It was the group of Marxists that came over, Marxist academics
Germany.
that came over in the 1930s. And this was an actual strategy of theirs that we have to, in order to have the Marxist revolution, you have to change the culture. In order to change the culture, you indoctrinate the children.
And one of the first things that a totalitarian government does is you want to get rid of the parents.
Well, we'll see.
Really quick, just because I know we talked about the LGBT specifically, and there's so much more in this to talk about, but like, I would be curious how many members of the LGBT community would actually be okay with that show.
I don't think a lot.
Because I don't think many
I think there's a difference between the activists and
I don't think there are many conservative LGBTQ activists, but I think there are a lot of leftist LGBTQ activists that are supporting this. I know several.
I think there's more than we know because we don't see them on your media.
Yeah, that's true.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I know a lot personally, but
all right, well, we'll continue to follow this. One thing I just wanted to point out that I did like about all of this, one thing is I do like the representation of multiple different
I love
people.
that.
Yeah, so I
different
do like that.
Barbies, different looks with
and I think that's the key. That's with the giving your child
but the
an
parents
opposite.
can decide that.
But I think that's separate from the ideology. There is a distinct ideology that is being inculcated
There was one
now,
lady,
and it's different than just not
the beauty
being
of
racist.
seeing all these different things.
There's a difference between mixing politics with like learning about different cultures and ethnicities. That's fantastic. What schools really should do that would be a big service to students.
Teach them how to read and write.
Well, but I think a lot of I actually feel like, in my personal experience, learning about race in a negative way comes from the schools, especially when they start to talk about like the civil rights movement and this and that, because they teach it in such a way that it's like you're the victims and you're the oppressors, instead of teaching it as this is history. And you know what? They should teach all of the different types
history.
of
history. It's all
American history.
But they should teach all. If they're going to teach slavery, they should teach it going all the way back from Africa.
They should.
And if they teach slavery, they should talk about all the different types of it and slavery across the world, and teach it as one unit so people can see, like, over time, it was wrong. Every single group, every single ethnicity, the Irish, the Jews, blacks in America, et cetera, the Chinese, Japanese, they've all been enslaved at a point. And it's all terrible, but it's history. And
the history is so complex.
The Persians, the Romans, the Greeks.
Yeah, we're only seeing they're deliberately changing.
That's a totally different, subject. So we will move on from that and definitely tackle that, because that can be a totally different topic.
Oh my gosh, so much to talk about.
It's fascinating.
It is fascinating.
It is.
I love cultures. I love diversity.
So next we are moving on to something on the pop scene, pop culture. We're moving on to relationship guru.
I thought we were doing the.
Oh, what?
Oh, I thought we were highlighting that,
Yeah, we
boy
are.
with the blood.
No. We're going to just move on to, we'll do that next week. We're going to move on to Derrick Jaxn. So Derrick Jaxn is a relationship guru with 1.3 million followers, has confessed to having multiple affairs after fans uncovered his indiscretions. Derrick Jaxn, who preaches healing and healthy relationships, took to Instagram last week to confess in a video with his wife, Derrick Jaxn. So this was all over the blogs and the news about this man. Now, I never knew about him until this came out.
Yeah, the last couple of weeks, seriously.
Right, I never knew.
You didn't know about him?
No,
I didn't either.
His videos.
Oh, see, I never.
He's a male cuddlefish, is what he is.
So what was he before this? What was he talking
Can
about?
we all go on the record first to say, as women, we denounce his wife on TV, on camera with that bonnet on her head?
Well, it wasn't a bonnet.
She looked like a hostage.
Yeah, it wasn't a bonnet.
It
was a hat. I looked closer. It had actually like embroidery on the hat. But she looked bad. I mean, she didn't even have one. People talking about that.
On makeup.
She didn't have a bra.
Oh my
Her
God.
breast hung so low. If you look at it again, it was terrible.
Oh my God.
Terrible.
But when
Well, I
you were
want
on
mine to
camera
hang
talking
low.
about your
I want mine to
husband was
just go
sleeping
away.
with other women, and I think he was telling people that like his wife was bad in bed, and then you bring your wife on camera
Looking
looking just
like
homely
that.
and
Yeah.
slovenly, and
then
embarrassing for the woman.
whatever affairs he's
nothing.
had, can I use you?
What?
I mean, he's.
First of all, this man is
Holding on for dear life.
he is
like she was gonna run.
He is really muscular. I mean, you can tell he's got a
he's a
nice
nice-looking
body.
guy,
I mean,
yeah.
he had like
And he was full of himself.
yeah, he is. But you got to give credit where credit's due. I mean, he's a nice looking guy. I mean, he was
nice-looking
thick.
guy.
I mean,
I don't care about.
Well,
I don't
it's the
care what he
visual
does.
though. The visual of him.
Oh, yeah, that he's
this
so
nice looking
attractive.
shirt, and he's sitting there, and he like held her arm like that, and then he's looking nice, and she's
pulled her,
looking
yeah.
there with no bra.
She
and,
looks like she's been scrubbing toilets all day.
yeah.
Right.
No, I mean, I don't care. I don't care if he's had whatever affairs he's had. That's their marriage. I don't even know why this has to all be publicized. I get it that he's his brand or whatever he's doing.
that's
Right, but the main reason he's accountable, I agree with you. I personally don't care about any celebrity or anybody's personal lives, what their affairs are, whatever. It's their business. They can do what they want. But the reason he's accountable to all these people is because he has built a business.
Right, yeah.
He's monetizing on relationship advice and loyalty and all these things, and then he's being a hypocrite.
What does he say?
He's critiqued many men.
Okay, that's what I want
called
to
out
know.
many men. I was watching this.
cheating.
Well, he said he's not. When I saw the video, he's not doing it any longer, right?
Whatever. Oh, please. He's
No,
still trying
I'm
to plug
saying-
his book. He still
he's
tried to plug
stopping
his
his
book
book
in the
about?
apology.
What's the book? What's the premise?
About healing your relationship from affairs.
Did he mention his affairs in his books? I don't know.
I don't know. I haven't read the book.
No, this just came out.
Right, it just came out. So I guess to his point, to being a hypocrite, I don't know if he's ever admitted this previously, or if he's still doing it.
No,
or
he's
not.
never admitted it previously.
I think he tried to hide it.
Well, I mean,
been trying to
there's a
hide
certain
it.
amount of privacy, number one, I would say. But if he has stopped doing it, or if he's whatever, how long ago it's been, I don't know.
I think it's been
I'm
March.
sure, I think he's still cheating. I'm sorry.
think
I don't
it's been
go.
It came out
It's been months.
because
It's a
people he
thing.
cheated with started coming out publicly about it. That's
Like
how-
recently?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And so this is when he decided, well, you know what, all these women are coming out saying that I'm cheating, so I got to come out and tell people that what happened. And so that's
He's just
why
trying
he
to save
came
face
out
and save his brand.
Yeah. And
Why does the woman
Is it
in a lot of
normal-
cases?
Or,
Go ahead.
sorry, I was just gonna say, is it normal to talk about yourself in third person?
No, this guy was like he was having a nervous breakdown. Like he was having a mental break.
Like, I get it. Maybe he was trying to
What did he
drive the
say?
point. Like, you can even. He just kept saying.
No, only reason why I think he did it was because he was trying, because that's what he does. He talks about these people who have relationship problems.
Right.
So I guess he was trying to use himself
Right,
as
just
this
trying to
main
drive the
person.
point.
But
Okay.
it's
But it was-
crazy.
It came across narcissistic and arrogant.
It didn't seem sincere to me.
Well,
It did
it
not
came
seem
across
sincere.
as deflecting responsibility.
No,
like,
you know what he did?
Like, I think he said I apologize one time, but at the end he didn't say I apologize again. Like he never said I apologize to the men I've called out before.
No, he looked to me. And again, I had never known about him until a few weeks ago. The video I saw, he didn't look like he was sincere. It looked like he was pandering to his art.
Yeah, he was putting on a performance. This was the thing that I thought was so ridiculous about his video, because he did the video with his wife where he admitted to the cheating in third person. Then he did a reaction video to his apology.
That's the one I saw.
He did a reaction video to the apology, and he said, "I'm going to talk about this in third person." As if I'm just critiquing it, right? And basically, he used it as a platform to defend himself. So he said,
in a roundabout way,
he criticized his wife. He said, "The first thing I noticed was how homely the wife looked, and she looked like she was in a hostage video, and she didn't want to be there. But then I realized that's just the way that she looks normally, and so I guess that's just, you know."
He said that?
I mean, I'm exaggerating.
I thought he said
lightly.
Wait, I thought he said people. I thought he said people thought that. I thought he said the comments said people.
Right, but still, you're going to say that about your wife?
I know.
On a public video?
Look, they practiced and rehearsed this before.
Yes,
I mean, she looked like she's just a robot to me.
He blamed
she looked very
women.
robotic.
He blamed women for idolizing him. He said, basically, it's like, he said, you should never idolize anyone. I mean, I can't help it that all of these women who put me on a pedestal were wrong. I don't know why they would do that. I'm just the greatest guy ever. And then he said, but I really believe that, Derrick Jaxn, it really seems like he's doing the work. And I think that we should I applaud him for taking accountability. And he seems like a great guy. And I'm on the side of his wife. And she said that we should just forgive him and move on. So I don't have to forgive him.
We don't have to forgive him anything. Because he didn't do anything to us. It's them two that she needs to forgive him. We don't have to forgive or even want to hold anger or whatever.
Relationship.
All I would say is he better not be posting any more relationship advice content as far as loyalty goes. He better change his story. He better change his angle for his show.
Well,
I don't know what he would do.
Like, he's a male
do workout videos.
Well, he's a male feminist that used his videos to attack and denigrate men, and it was just a way of basically like thirst trapping for women.
There are some really funny by men that he.
But one thing he to give the wife a little bit of credit, I think she was just because I went through all of his past videos. She's never been on camera with him, so I don't think she was used to the camera.
No, because I think he tries to hide her because he was using those videos as a way to get. Can I say pussy?
You said it.
We say
you said it. Oh my God.
Yeah. I mean,
so moving right along.
I didn't want to say clitoris. So I thought the clip was okay.
Moving right along.
Using those videos, I don't think he wanted his wife to be in the video.
Because this is not female genitalia 101. It is not. That's not what this is.
I don't know. You could tell she was nervous.
He was using the videos to try to get tail.
Oh my God.
So he didn't want his wife in the video.
She said that she's the one that said that we need to go live about this, blah, blah, blah. Like, I saw a video about that.
Oh, she wants the money too.
Sure.
I mean, she doesn't want to lose. She doesn't want to lose her great train either.
That's true.
She should have. I wish she was more active in the video. I think she should have came from a place of strength. This is their stick, though. They got.
I get that, but I mean, look, work on your marriage. If you're going to stay together, forgive each other, whatever. Just get a different hairstyle on camera. Take that bonnet off your head. Stop looking like a Stepford wife. That's what I don't get.
That's why I said she should have came from a place of strength and spoke more.
Well, yes. I mean, and this shows
why was he the first
emotion
one speaking? She should have been the first one.
That's what I said. Yeah, she should have been.
Show some emotion. I mean. Say that you're angry. Show that you're really angry. I mean, be real.
Maybe she's not an emotional person.
Well, if it's happened more than once, so she's probably numb to it already.
Right.
Psychologically.
I just think it's ironic.
She should have come on there.
Maybe she thinks she doesn't deserve any better. Maybe she thinks she can't get any better.
But it is interesting because the first thing I did notice was, like, he looks dressed.
Yeah, he's dressed. I thought he was presentable.
Right, he had a muscle shirt on.
He was presentable.
She doesn't look like she was going to go to work that day or like she could be on camera that day. You know what I mean? Like, most ladies face, I don't care. She's a pretty girl.
She was pretty.
But, like,
I honestly thought she had some kind of cognitive deficit.
Listen, it's almost like
she looked like he was leaving
her. She had the hat on. She may have had some type of brain damage.
Like, she looks really nice in the other photos.
It's almost like
that's the thing. Like, if you're gonna be doing a video like this that's gonna go viral, okay, then why not?
He probably came home. He like,
you know what I mean?
He's like,
but it's almost
baby,
like
we gonna do this video. Come on out here.
But there's also
she said that.
There was like this thing he posted 2 years ago. This meme
Were you on camera?
of a fixed-up woman and a not fixed-up woman, right? There was this meme, and it from 2 years ago, and it's coming up again now, and people are like, how ironic, because the meme was, ladies, don't stop fixing yourself up when you're in a relationship.
Yeah, I'm telling you.
And now you have his wife, like looking like the second picture.
She looked like she just came out the kitchen from frying fish.
I'm like, you're setting her up to.
That's what I'm saying. It's like he set her up in order to say, look, ladies, look at how sexy I am. Look at what I was dealing with. Don't you understand why I cheated? That's what he did. That's what he was doing.
And then he went and talked about it. People were saying she was homely.
Yeah. He's like, don't you understand why I had to step outside of my marriage? Look at this.
Right, and it's not even like she's a pretty.
I'm so much better than
she was pretty.
But like it did look like a bonnet. Like it looked like when you're going in the shower.
But do you wear a bonnet at night? Do you wear a bonnet? Oh, okay, I just want to know that.
But
do you wear a bonnet?
No.
Okay.
I mean, I wash my hair every morning.
I did.
Pretty much.
No, you wear one. Okay. All right.
At night.
I wear a scarf.
You know what I mean, though? But exactly, like it looked like maybe she was getting ready for bed or something.
Not on
which
camera.
is fine.
Right,
Look.
right.
Everybody's natural face is beautiful, but I was just saying, like, he's putting himself in this presentation mode.
Yeah.
Like, be in a presentation mode too.
Right. He should have warned her. Exactly. Yeah.
That was what
he came in with the camera and said, "Baby, come out the kitchen from cooking and sit down." And she said, "All right, I'm frying fish."
Well, maybe next year she may come out with her video that now she has a side.
Hey, maybe she'll be all dolled up and have her own side piece.
Yep. Well, that does it for us today. That wraps up this episode. Thank you so much for watching, everyone.
We have to shout out T. She wasn't with us tonight.
Yes, T.
Happy birthday.
Yes, she has celebrated her birthday yesterday, and she is not able to come today, but she will be back next week. So we're looking forward to that. Until then, count your blessings and live a life of purpose. Good night. All right.
Agree with you guys.